to Women Lead, a production of the Women of Color Empowerment Institute. We are your hosts. I'm Michelle Austin Pammies.
I'm Bernadette Norris Weeks.
And I'm Kathy Eggleston.
Today, our show will be about Driving the Green Book, a book that was recently written by Mr. Alvin Hall. And the book is an amazing book. I think you will enjoy the show. We are at the literary feast hosted by the Broward Literary Foundation. And we'd like to welcome everyone to our show. And we hope you'll learn a lot from this show.
So some of you may be familiar with the Green Book from the movie that actually won the Oscar for Best Picture. Dr. Don Shirley and his driver traveled through the South and used the Black Traveler's Guide called the Green Book to navigate during times of segregation. But our author, Alvin Hall, found that the movie Green Book was only a little part of that story.
True. In Driving the Green Book, Alvin Hall and his friend Janie Woods Weather drive from Detroit to Louisiana, visiting motels, restaurants, and stores where African Americans were welcomed during a period where driving out of their hometown while Black meant you faced risk when you wanted to eat somewhere, rest for the night, or even make a bathroom stop.
The great thing about Alvin Hall's book is it gives a great historical perspective of why it was even necessary in the first place to have a green book. Many of us take for granted being able to just drive on the highway and go wherever we're going, but it wasn't like that years ago for African Americans in this country. And I'll tell you the truth, it wasn't that long ago, right?
Absolutely. And I'm going to be honest. I pride myself as someone who knows a little bit about Black history. I had heard the term Green Book from the movie. I just assumed that it was Green Book because it was like the yellow book, the yellow pages. I had no knowledge of the history of Victor Green, who founded the Green Book.
Okay, I know you guys are getting excited. Times have changed. We could go on Expedia, book any hotel. We can book any restaurant we want, etc., etc. Times have changed. But let's be real. There are some driving while Black incidents still taking place. Mostly it has to do with police brutality. But there are other issues.
Driving while bird watching or driving while...
Whatever you're doing. And I'm going to point out a particular case. It has nothing to do with driving, but it shows you that we haven't evolved all that much. The Green Book was published last about 16 years ago, meaning in the 60s, it was still needed. People are alive today who knew when it was needed. But when you look at being in a neighborhood that's predominantly white and driving a high-end vehicle as a Black individual, you can be stopped and you will be stopped, likely to be stopped. Because people wonder, what are you doing in this neighborhood? Not even thinking that you may live there or you may have a friend there. And when we look at Henry Louis Gates, a Harvard law professor, so well known, who was arrested in his home for going home. Because some neighbors had thought that they saw Black people breaking in. He was breaking into his own home, according to them. It's still ongoing. It's still an issue. And I think that our conversation with this author, Alvin Hall, is going to be extraordinary today as we kind of delve into not only where have we been, but where we are.
That's right. So we will be right back after these messages with the author, Alvin Hall, about his new book, Driving the Green Book. Stay with us. At the Women of Color Empowerment Institute, our mission is to enhance and expand leadership by women of color. We do this in a variety of different ways, including but not limited to providing mentorship opportunities for young professionals where we assist in helping to create paths to leadership. We empower women to develop capacities for social change. We produce programs that promote heritage awareness, and we provide training opportunities for business and government. Our institute holds seminars focused on professional success techniques, and we host many other events such as our popular Advocates for Change and Leaders Connect. The Women of Color Empowerment Institute publishes a magazine called Women Lead. Our signature event is the Women of Color Empowerment Conference, a yearly conference where hundreds of leaders gather from all across the United States and beyond. To learn more about membership and how you can support our programs or be a sponsor of the Women Lead TV, visit us at nationalwomenofcolor.com. Again, that's nationalwomenofcolor.com.
The law office of Austin, Pammies, Norris, Weeks, Powell is a full-service law firm practicing in the area of governmental law, including the representation of municipalities, civil litigation, personal injury, real estate, and corporate transactional matters. With over 100 years of collective experience, our attorneys are admitted to practice before state courts, federal courts, and the United States Supreme Court. We are conveniently located in downtown Fort Lauderdale and can be reached at 954-768-9770. Or for more information about the law firm of Austin, Pammies, Norris, Weeks, Powell, visit our website at apnwlaw.com. That's apnwlaw.com.
In Driving the Green Book, Alvin Hall discusses the Green Book Black Traveler's Guide that was a key to Blacks being able to move through the segregated South and across America more safely. The book was developed by Mr. Victor Green, whose history Mr. Hall also discusses in the Green Book. We're so delighted to have him here.
Thank you.
Welcome, Mr. Hall.
Welcome.
Thank you.
So welcome, Mr. Alvin Hall. We are so thrilled to have you with us today.
I'm happy to be here.
I have read Driving the Green Book. It's amazing, and it's an important walk through African American history in this country. We'll be talking to you about that, but first, tell us about your background and what led to your decision to write about it.
I had never heard of the Green Book until I was on a flight from New York to London, and I saw it in a travel article. And I was amazed that I, who was an educated Black man, had never heard of this publication. So I decided that when I got back to New York City, I would research it. And I went to the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture in Harlem, and there I found the largest collection of green books in the United States. I think they have all of them except one. And I was astonished that this publication that had been published almost every year except during the war from 1936 to 1967 that I did not know anything about. And so this started my research. I discovered that Victor Hugo Green, who was a postman in Hackensack, New Jersey, but who traveled to the South with his wife, Alma, experienced aggravations and decided to create this guide to offer other African Americans knowledge of and the locations of safe places to find the services that they wanted while they were on the road. So Victor was actually engaging in an act of resistance. He did not want to accept the system the way it was, so he came up with a solution.
Now, tell us more about Victor Green. You know, I admitted to my co-host that I had heard of the Green Book before the movie, and I just assumed that it was called Green Book, just like Yellow Pages, the Yellow Book. But tell us about this man. And you know, we're the Women of Color Empowerment Institute. I believe there was a wife involved also.
Yes. So Victor and Alma experienced these aggravations when they went south to Richmond every year. And I think they just got tired of them. And so he and Alma, working together, decided to create first a list of places on their way to Richmond where they could get services and welcoming services by gasoline. It's hard for people to imagine today, Kathy, that you couldn't just stop at any service station and buy gasoline as a black person. Some of them wouldn't serve you, some of them would make you wait, some of them might pull a gun on you. It was all over the place, the risk during that period of time. So Victor decided, working with Alma, to create this guide. And then, because he was a member of the Postmen's Union, at that time there were two Postmen's Union, a black one and a white one. And history shows that Victor was a member of the White Postmen's Union, ironically, but I think it may have been New Jersey, the reason that he was. And so, working with the Black Postmen's Union and the White Postmen's Union, they were able to build a list of places that were welcoming to black people. The postman would give him this information. And I'm sure some of this information probably also came from the Pullman, the Pullman porters who worked on the trains.
Now, I know that they published this book for decades, and I believe Victor became infirmed.
Yes.
And Alma may have had a larger role.
Yes. Victor published it while working two jobs. Alma was essential to keeping the services going during that period of time. I think Victor died in 1960, and then Alma, who had the depth of knowledge and what we call now the institutional knowledge, kept it going until it stopped in 1967. So she was very important. But if you look at the staff of the Green Book was all black women. That is the most amazing thing. So in essence, Victor was quite forward-thinking, as was Alma, in who they brought on to manage this publication.
You used the word aggravations. And I know that Victor Green, it sounds that he was able to carefully maneuver how he would navigate language and that was used in the Green Book. And I know that he had a contract with the federal government.
Yes.
And so I want you to talk with us a little bit about how he had to, be that careful in order to be able to publish this Green Book that wasn't threatening, but at the same time provide a benefit to the African American community.
Victor needed access to information. And how do you get that access? Black people didn't have that access, so a lot of government agencies and white people in managerial positions did. So Victor was very much aware. He was marketing savvy in that way, that you had to tone the language down, present it in a particular way so that the people from the government and other agencies from whom he was asking for information would not feel threatened by this information. And he was very careful about that. You don't see the use of the word racism. You don't see the use of the word sundown towns. There are all these groups of words that don't appear in the Green Book because he was very much aware of alienating the source of his information. But I think there was another underlying reason. I think that Victor was aware that if a random anti-black person picked up this publication, that it could be provocative to them, and that might lead to violence against some of the places listed there. Therefore, keeping the language in that sort of middle ground meant that the businesses listed in the Green Book were unlikely to be subject to brutalism or terrorism in America.
Well, throughout driving the Green Book, your book, you point out that owning a vehicle had a lot to do with it. Right? Yes. You had to first own a vehicle in order to be concerned with driving on the road while black.
Yes.
You also mentioned the fact that the auto industry itself was instrumental in increasing black wealth in America.
Yes.
So I want you to talk a little bit about the relationship between the auto industry and black workers who live north, and also base the what the vehicles symbolize for the African worker community.
I had the wonderful experience of meeting a young man who is a tour guide in Detroit. He has his own company called Jaman Jordan. And he talked about this incredible history that as these black people from the rural South moved to Detroit to work in the automobile industry or related industries, that they went from being sharecroppers, where they were struggling to make ends meet or ending up the year in debt, to earning more money than they had ever earned in their lives. But these were practical people. Remember, they didn't go wild with the money. These were practical people who remembered the years when you worked on a farm and you did not clear the debt that you owed to the sharecropper. So they would save their money. And because the US government had restrictions on allowing black people to buy their own houses, redlining black neighborhoods, and there were local restrictions on where black people could live, the one symbol that you had arrived was that you had saved up enough money to buy your own car. To quote Jaman Jordan, now you could drive past those sundown towns that wouldn't allow you to stay there. You did not have to take the city bus and sit in the back or sit in the Negro car in the train, which was always right behind the engine with all the coal dust coming into you. Now you were the captain of your own ship, and you could guide that ship wherever you wanted. So while we couldn't buy houses, we could buy cars. And think about it. You knew that when you traveled, you couldn't stay in a hotel. You couldn't get food. You couldn't even stop and expect to get decent service even at the back door. So you wanted a car that was big. So if you had children, they could stretch out on that back seat. They could play games back there. If you needed to stop, you wanted a seat that you could recline a bit so that you could get a great deal of rest. So a car became an important symbol, not just of African American achievement, but African American independence. But it also became a safeguard. You wanted the most powerful car you had, just in case you had to get away from a situation. You wanted to be able to drive hard and as fast as you can to get away. We heard stories about this from people after people, about relatives having gotten in these situations and then gunning their cars and being able to get away and save the family.
I love how you reminded me of why my family may have done certain things or behaved certain ways that they did. For instance, one of the things that you had in the Green Book was the driving the Green Book was how Black families would park their cars in the backyard, new cars in the backyard. And I remember when my family, it must have been the first new car we had, and it's one of my early memories. And we were parking it in the backyard. And I believe that, and of course, this is, the 70s at this time, but I believe that it came from that whole, time period of when that's what Black people did, because you didn't want to be too showy.
That's
you
right.
didn't want to draw attention to yourself. And can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. That's another Hezekiah Jackson story. He talked about how his father would buy a new car, and they all parked their cars in the backyards because they knew that if the white people saw that they had nice cars, that there could be trouble. So when they drove to work, they would group together in an old pizza car and then drive to work. And even in my own family, I could not believe it, Bernadette, that when I grew up, I thought my uncles were just crazy. You just got this nice new Ford. Why are you parking it in the backyard, right? And then they'd have these old cars they'd park in the front yard. It was exactly that, because white people at that time tended to look at any black achievement, even buying a nice car, as a threat to the tenets of white supremacy.
Wow. Well, you also talk about not just black car ownership bringing independence, but the impact of the auto industry writ large on black people in this country. Tell us more about that.
When black people moved to Detroit, they were first used as strikebreakers at many of the big firms. But then Henry Ford, who was a progressive at that time, and that's a relative term by any means, decided he would pay black workers equal to white workers. That's the storyline. It's actually a bit more complex than that, because you had to belong to one of the three organizations that he deemed indicative of good behavior and good citizenship and good religious principles in order to get that equal pay. But a lot of the older line, like GM and those firms, did not pay black people the same as they paid white people. And GM actually would not allow black people to buy Cadillacs. So the stories we heard about the number of black families who had to go to people who bought Cadillacs from GM for their lots and then would sell them to black people at a higher price was widespread. I remember that a lady I met in Detroit said she hates Cadillacs to this day because her father paid so much money for those Cadillacs. So, buying a nice car was complicated, but also when black people started to earn money so they could buy those nice cars with their pay from Ford and gradually other automobile manufacturers, they didn't always let you buy the best car.
Well, you talked about sundown towns, and I want to hear a little bit more about this, because what I don't understand, and it's funny how you said Mr. Green didn't put that in the book, where these sundown towns were, because that seems to be something that you would want to know. But I guess if you were in a car, maybe it wasn't such a problem if you knew where you were going, the next place to go to. But can you talk a little bit about the sundown towns?
Sundown towns were a largely northern phenomenon. People often think that they were in the South, but the interaction between black people and white people in the South was much more complex. But in the North, there were clearly demarcations in towns, cities, and suburbs where black people were not permitted to be after the sun went down. In James Lowen's book, Sundown Towns, he notes that the largest number of sundown towns in America was in Indiana. Ohio had huge numbers. Talking to Jamon Jordan, Detroit had sundown suburbs where you were not allowed to be as a black person after dark. Grosse Pointe being one of them. They were in California. They were on Long Island in New York. They were all over the place. They were all over the North. In fact, all of the Levitt towns in Pennsylvania and New York did not allow black people not just to buy houses there, but also not to be in Levittown after the sun went down. If you were caught, anything could happen to you. You could be arrested, you could be harassed. And one guy in one story told us that his father remembered a man being tarred and feathered in a town in Georgia when he was there after sundown. Okay. But there's a great story that comes out of this. Let's say you find yourself somehow in one of these towns. What do you do if you don't know anybody in this town? You run into the only black person you know and you say, is there a funeral home in this neighborhood owned by black people? And so therefore you would go to the black funeral home and ask them if you could stay there overnight. Wow. So it became a point of refuge for many black travelers who found themselves in towns where they didn't know each other, or sundown towns where The black community was just outside of the town, but there was a black funeral home in which you could stay.
Well, talking about refuge, you mentioned in your book that there were black resort towns. And through today, you mentioned earlier before the show, you talked about Idlewild. And through today, we have Martha's Vineyard,
Yes.
for example. Why were these towns necessary, and why do they continue to have meaning in Black?
For high-achieving black professionals at that time, lawyers, doctors, social workers, teachers, principals in school, they needed a break from the ongoing pressure of what we call today the white gaze. So they created these communities where like-minded people, like-minded black people, could come together and enjoy each other's company and just relax and have a good time on their own terms. That's why these places were so important. They were the sources of rejuvenation. One guy said to me, when I was out in the real world, I was always being Jim Crowed. I had never heard that phrase, Jim Crowed, before. However, when he was in Idlewild or Fox Lake or one of these communities like Oak Bluffs that didn't exist, he said, I did not have to negotiate with anybody who I was. Everybody there was like me, and they knew who I was, and they knew who they were as black people.
So Alvin, you're actually in town for the literary feast to support the Broward Public Library.
Yes.
I have gotten so much out of reading in my life, and a lot of our young people are not reading except on social media so much anymore. What do you say to the next generation of our people about the importance of reading?
Reading feeds your imagination. It opens you to worlds that are beyond the worlds that you know and recognize and are comfortable with. As a young person, I was raised on a farm in the Florida Panhandle. Did I know about France? Did I know about Istanbul? Did I know about Myanmar, which is, I didn't know about any of those things, but reading brought those worlds alive for me. Reading fed my imagination. So when I started on my life journey, reading fed the possibilities for me that were beyond my own experience, but existed in my head for me to achieve.
You have gone all around the world, but thank goodness you are still telling our stories. The book is Driving the Green Book, and we were so delighted to have author Alvin Hall with us on this edition of Women Lead. And until the next time, be empowered.